lighting today, and I'm using a scene I downloaded from 3drender.com at the moment. So let me first show off the scene. Start there. This is the bedroom scene, and I have a bedroom which is an enclosed environment, and that's really the key here, is that this is an enclosed area. I just want to really point that out. That's the most important part about this, is that it's actually kind of hard to get a nice view of the bedroom, but yeah, it's like the challenge first is to get an interesting view. Start there. So, and of course, we don't want to render out of our perspective either. But I'm just showing off the room at this point. If I go to wireframe, you can kind of see it. And, you know, we could, of course, use X-ray mode if that helps you. But it's definitely an enclosed room, right? That's that doesn't have any openings except for these windows here. So the two windows are the only thing lighting the room. That's important to note. The door's not open. We only have two sources of light. Do we only have two sources of light, really, though? Is that really the case? Because, I mean, I see a lamp in here. So it's up to the artist as to how you want to light this. You have to ask yourself, what time of day is it? Do we want to have interior lighting? What are those interior lights? There's a lamp here, and there's also a lamp here, right? So you could potentially use either of these lamps, turn on the lamps. That's another option. Before I go too much farther, are you guys here? Can you hear me? Are you guys, I gotta open up a Twitch window again.
Yeah, we're typing in Twitch chat.
Okay, sorry. I'm gonna mute this. All right. I just want to make sure you can hear me, and as always, you know, ask me questions on the Twitch chat, or even better, interrupt me, because I believe audio, even though there's a lag, still works better as long as there's not too much of an echo. So, but I'll try and check the Twitch chat as often as I can too. All right. So hopefully, like, stop me. In fact, speak up and stop me if you need to. All right. So, how do we light this? Well, as we've already gone over in previous lessons, we want to think of this in terms of a key light. The key light is a directional light. It's the sun. Let's just call it sun, right? And I always light everything like one thing at a time. So I guess you should ask yourself, do you want to light your fill light first, or do you want to light your sunlight first? That's kind of up to you. Remember that your fill light, the light coming from your sky, is not typically going to be ever as bright as the light from the sun. Fill light implies that you're just filling in shadows, and it shouldn't really be that intense. So you have to ask yourself, do you want to start with a fill light, which is low light, or do you want to start with your main source of light, which is the sun? You know, make that decision. In my case, I'm going to go ahead and start with the sky. And actually, you know what? I'll make a new one just to start over completely from scratch, just so people aren't completely confused. So this is my skylight or my fill light, and you can label it as such, sky or fill. And so right off the bat, again, we should be only ever lighting one light at a time. I cannot emphasize that enough. What's my view look like? It looks like this. Turn on my resolution gate. I want to pull out a little bit, and this is where changing your focal length of the camera is actually useful. If I pull too far out, see, I'm going through the wall. So this is actually where that we were just talking about camera focal length. This is where it really comes into play. Go to View, select Camera, and right now I have a 50 millimeter focal length, right? So if I go down to 35, that's default, that's film. I could even go lower if I wanted to, but now I start to get some of that distortion that you guys are experiencing. And I mean, 35 is pretty standard, again, for film. So I'd like to keep it there. I want to hit the 3 button on this lamp so that it's nice and smooth and not chunky. Okay, so let's render and let's see what happens. I just have my default sky dome in here with no settings changed. I haven't done anything. And let's see what we get in our render. By the way, I know we can use the interactive renderer, and I might use that, but I prefer the old one because for right now, at least, it's more stable. It's a little bit easier for me to control. It's less likely to crash. But if you feel like you want to be a cool kid and use the interactive renderer, and I might even switch to it, then that's fine too. If you have a nice fast computer like an i9 or an i7 with a lot of crazy specs. So right off the bat, I'm getting nothing. It's black, right? And I should be getting a lot because it's white light coming in from a sky dome. Like, why am I not getting more? So one thing you can do, of course, right off the bat is start to turn up your intensity. And we need to worry about color and intensity. Never leave something in an intensity of 1 in a color of white. That's just bad. Don't do it. So always change these things. We could change the color of our sky and make it like blue sky, right? Or just like quite blunt force blue kind of sky thing. We could do this until we started to see some kind of color or something, some light, right? And just sort of crank up our intensity until we start to see something, which we are. Let me hit the escape button. So if I go to 30, for example, which, by the way, with Mental Ray and like older renderers, it's very sensitive to this intensity stuff. So with Mental Ray, typically an intensity of 1 would be like maybe 100. But now with Arnold and with quadratic decay, that's a little bit harder to figure out, right? So sometimes you need to really crank the intensity of your lights way up. Like I have an intensity of 30 right now, for example. But I am starting to see some nice blue light coming in from the sky. Hopefully at this point in the class, you know that solid blue light is not maybe the best thing, but at least we have an idea of what intensity we might want. And I want to repeat here that the intensity might be kind of high because everything's set to quadratic decay, which requires higher intensity. So if you don't know what that means, it means that as light travels across distance, it gets dimmer. That's called decay, right? So everything by default has real world decay or quadratic decay, and that just generally means we have to turn our intensity up maybe a bit higher than we would have had to have done years ago. Okay, we know that we would like an HDR in here. So let's just skip to that because we already know this part. We're going to plug in an HDR. And you might find, as soon as you put the HDR in here, that intensity is way, way too high. Here's an empty lot. I'll just throw the empty lot in there. There it is. And I think I'm just going to guess right now that once I put that HDR in, now my intensity at 30 is going to be super blown out. I'm pretty sure. Let's find out. And I also want to mention there's no other light in the scene at this point, or at least they're all turned off. So when you hide your lights, obviously it's like a light switch, you're turning them off. And again, stop me at any point if none of this makes sense. With an intensity of 30, with an HDR, you might find something insanely blown out. And as you can already tell, it's starting to struggle a little bit. An HDR, by the way, is going to be a lot more expensive to render than a solid color. But we're going to get color through the HDR that looks a lot better. They call it convoluted color, but that just sounds fancy. Point is, your HDR will give you accurate reflections. Your HDR will give you something other than a solid light. Specifically, your HDR is giving you colored light based on the image of the HDR. And now I'm starting to get a little bit of color in my fill light. Still super noisy though, and I don't like the idea that my intensity is this high. I like to keep my HDR intensity at 1 if I can get away with it. So if I'm blowing out my HDR intensity, although you can do it, so I invite you to turn it up a little bit if you need to. In other words, I wouldn't necessarily go as high as 30 or 300, but an intensity of 3 or even 3.2, because I like to use powers of 2. Anybody know why? Quiz question. For the Twitch chat, whoever has a really good memory, I don't know. Does anybody know why it might be better to play around with values in Maya or any 3D software? Oh man, come on, stop glitching out. It's just rendering. It takes It hurts when it renders. Stop. Escape. Escape. Don't. Okay. No. Escape. All right. I think it stopped. Good. Starting to hurt a little bit here. Anyway, so my intensity is at 3, and you can see it's pretty dark still. You're supposed to have an intensity basically of 1, but I like to use powers of 2. And I guess, again, my question is, why are powers of 2, so 3.2? And this is going to seem kind of silly, but does anybody know why powers of 2 are not a bad starting place when you type in numbers? Anybody have any? It's kind of a weird trick or weird question. But why would like 1.6 be better or 0.8 be better? Does anybody with a good memory maybe know why? By any chance? Remember, we're just making our fill light here. Nobody knows. You can say no on the chat or speak up. It makes the render a little faster. Quads. Okay. Back. Yeah. So not quads, and that quads really has more to do with topology. You should always try to render in quads whenever possible when you're creating polygon topology. No, the answer is actually kind of a weird, simple answer. Everything inside of your computer, in terms of even the hardware, the CPU, the RAM, your GPU, all of it, in some way is based on powers of 2. If you want to think of your RAM as like, if you were to buy RAM, it would come in like 128, 256, or a 512 meg, or these days like 16 gigs of RAM. Always powers of 2. I don't know if anybody's ever like had to buy RAM before, right? So if I go up to 6.4, yeah, it's doubling my intensity, but because everything in your computer is loosely based around powers of 2, that's true of 3D software as well, by the way, then it's an old trick that you can very slightly speed up your rendering by making your values power of 2. And if you don't really know, like you're guessing at values, then why not use powers of 2 to speed up the rendering? It's only a very slight thing, like it doesn't speed it up that much, but yeah, it's just kind of an old school trick, old school thing. Okay, so a few things. We're getting a lot of noise, and we should know that by turning up our sampling, then that's going to help with our noise. And even in an intensity of 6.4, I'm still not getting very much brightness. This is a fill light, guys. So as a fill light, I don't want this to be overly bright, but you have to ask yourself, what time of day is it? And so if you look at that HDR, is that time of day like noon, or is that time of day in the afternoon? I mean, you got to look at your HDR, right? So if your HDR is, say, the middle of the day, then the inside of this room with those windows open, even through the Venetian blinds there, probably should still be a bit brighter than this. Like my intensity is 6.4. If this was mental ray, or if this was without an enclosed room, if you imagine there's no enclosed room, that would be like 640%. It's a lot. So my point is, I really have to crank up the intensity to really get this light into the room, even the fill light. And don't be afraid of doing that. So it's perfectly allowed to turn up your intensity to whatever you need to start to get the fill light you want, right? If I look at my perspective, look at the time of day here. God, this is like 2 p.m. or something. I mean, close to noon anyway. The sun is almost directly overhead, so we've got to be pretty close to noon. So if we know that, then we should see quite a bit of light in the room. And currently, that's not very much. So, up until now, I've always been an advocate of, well, just crank up the intensity and turn up the samples until the samples clean up the noise. So if the samples are high enough, the noise will go away. Crank up the intensity, and, that'll fix your problem. Well, yes, that's true, but we, a few years ago, got the added benefit of this exposure. And you are also allowed to turn up exposure. It's a little bit harder to sort of measure the intensity against the exposure. But watch how I do this. I want my exposure to be, again, a power of 2, like 3.2. Now watch what a difference this makes. This is what the old one looks like. I'll save this image, maybe do a little render region next to it, like this. And now that I've upped the exposure, 3.2, and by the way, the numbers are arbitrary, meaning that you could use 5 or 4 or 4.1 or whatever you want. So I don't want you to think that you have to stick to powers of 2. You don't at all. It's just one of those like things that if you use powers of 2, then your render might be just a touch by a fraction faster. And it's almost imperceptible, but it's just an old school trick. So I don't know. If you don't know what number to start with, try a power of 2. And now you're starting to see that, hey, look, I'm getting some nice fill light coming in, right? Everybody get that? Any questions so far? Yeah, it does technically make the render slightly faster just by a fraction. And again, you don't have to use that trick. It's not like it speeds it up by very much, but just by a tiny little bit. So yeah, I'm still getting a lot of noise here. And of course, if I up the sample here, then that theoretically should get rid of this noise. But here's the thing, guys. You don't want to turn your sampling up too high too quickly. And a sampling of 8 is a lot. So now it's taking quite a while just to render this very small bit. Like, wow, now it's in pain because now we've kind of like we've turned the samples up too high too quickly. Just this little square took almost half a minute. Like, that's too much, right? Let's take it back down to 4 or 3 because we have to deal with the other lights in the scene and we don't need to turn this up too quickly. But at least I'm starting to get some nice fill light, I'm kind of getting roughly both the color and the intensity that I want from out of the window. So, and if you feel like it's too much fill light, because keep in mind your fill light should always be pretty dark, you can always lower the intensity or the exposure. And I have found that generally speaking, you might get better results if you lower your intensity and keep it relatively low and instead raise your exposure. And yeah, I know it's not a power of 2, but like I said, that's not a hard and fast rule or anything. That's just like if you don't know where you want to start from, why not use a power of 2? Why not 1.6? Why not 3.2? 2.4, whatever. So it doesn't really give you a huge boost, but hey, if again you're not sure what value to start with, and you're just sort of guessing, then powers of 2 are a way to like say, okay, speed up the render a touch. All right, so now you can see an exposure of 5 is really giving me something pretty bright. Not too bad. I feel like if you turn your intensity too far up, what ends up happening is you sort of blow out the color a bit. But if you're relatively happy with this for your fill light, and again, we do have a lot of noise, so we have the sample in the light. That's one way to fight the noise. But there's also another way to fight the noise, which is up here in your Arnold renderer diffuse settings. So we could also turn up the sampling here. I repeat, don't do this, right, too early on, because we still have a long way to go, and a little bit of noise, like, we know how to fix it, right? We just turn up the sampling either in the light or in your Arnold settings, but you don't have to do that now by any means. Like I said, stop me if you guys have any concerns about this or any questions. And if you really struggle with this material, and I don't blame you, don't forget that this is only if you want to render an enclosed room and you want it to be completely physically accurate. In other words, all your measurements are correct, like you're rendering at the right size, for example. Like the scale is correct in the scene, and you're using all physically accurate lights, which again are in this Arnold shelf up here. So all the lights are here. These are all physically accurate lights. And of course, you're rendering with Arnold, obviously. So, all right. Are there any questions so far? You're starting to see that, the noise is beginning to get cleared up a little bit, but really the render time has just shot through the roof. Hopefully you guys can sort of see what I mean by that. It's like, wow. This is now starting to really hurt for render time. And I only have my samples at 4 for my Sky Dome, and I think I have my samples at 3 or 4 for my Arnold samples as well. But wow, this is taking a while, and it's like, wow, this is painful. So, what do? If we're relatively happy with our fill light, it's like that's not bad for a fill light. Let's go back to our Arnold settings, turn our diffuse back to 2. This is, by the way, the default. So when you start Maya, all these are at 2, 2, 2, 2. And remember that this is not true samples. Look at these numbers up here. A number 2 here actually means 16 samples, right? So pay attention to this mostly, or I guess I should say, keep your numbers low, really is the lesson here. Don't make these numbers too high, because like, again, if I turn my diffuse to 8, it's not really 8, is it? No, it's actually up to 256. So just be aware that these numbers should be turned up very slowly. So I'm actually bringing them back down to their defaults, 2, 2, 2, all the way across the board. And hey, I'm going to turn off my sky. And instead, I'll make a new sun. I'll even delete this guy. I'm going to move on to my move on to my key light. This is the only light, I think, that is not in your Arnold shelf. It's in your rendering shelf. The only light in this exercise you want to use that's like not. I keep talking about physically accurate lights. So all the lights in your Arnold shelf, these are all physically accurate lights, and they're made to work with real world scale and mimic real world lighting conditions. These lights in your rendering shelf are not by default physically accurate. So spotlight is great, directional light is great, and so on and so forth, but they weren't built necessarily to be physically accurate. So when you're creating a sun, for example, with your directional light, you're cheating, right? And you might be saying, well, if this is cheating, then what's the non-cheating way to do it? And actually, the answer is you could use in the Arnold shelf the sun and sky system, and that will give you a physically accurate sun and physically accurate sky. So why don't we just go right for that logically? And you could, by the way. The reason I don't like doing this is because I can't plug an HDR into this, so my lighting is not as it doesn't reflect an actual image or photo. So that's why, and if you want, we can do both. I'm actually game to do both. So, all right. Turn on your target, T for target, so you can use this targeting. And this is kind of a cool trick. You've got your target on, right? So you've got 2 different ways to aim this sun into the room. You can use your target, and again, that's T for target. Hold down V for vertex snap it, and vertex snapping, and kind of aim the light by vertex snapping. Like, what do we want to aim at? Maybe the bed. So now my target is on the bed. So that means the sun is going to hit that bed sheet perfectly through the Venetian blinds. I think that's a good idea. Let's try it. So let's see what we get. I've just got an intensity of 1. Go back to the render camera. This is my render camera. Do we see anything? I only have 1 light on. You always want to light one thing at a time. And you could just change the color to something that's not pure white, because you really shouldn't have pure white. generally speaking. Almost never. So at an intensity of 1, do we actually see anything at all? Do we get the sunlight on our bed? Save the image, render the region. We should just see the key light, only the sun going through the Venetian blinds, hitting the bed. Yes, we are getting it. And that's only at an intensity of 1. But we are definitely getting the Venetian blind pattern there on the bed. So at this point, you could change the color arbitrarily, but hopefully by this point you know that you can instead use Kelvin or color temperature. And there's a chart for this. I'm using a Kelvin of 5500, but there's a chart, right? At 3drender.com. Good so far, good. So there's a chart at 3drender.com. I know I mentioned this before, but just in case, go to Archives and go to Color Temperature Chart. And so this is going to tell you your color temperature in Kelvin. So if you wanted like fluorescent light for your lamp or sun, right? So this is supposed to be sun. Close to noon is maybe, or daylight 5500 to 6500. So I got 5500 in here. So that overrides this arbitrary yellow color. Okay, so then now we get something already a little bit more accurate, physically accurate, right? And we're getting a nice pattern of the sun on through the Venetian blinds. Got my nice gobo effect here, or light mask effect, looking pretty good. Now, we can either turn up the intensity here, or we can adjust the exposure. And I have not found really a secret formula here for which one. In other words, before I had exposure, before this was available, I would just turn up the intensity. So this is what I'm accustomed to doing, of course. But one thing about turning up the intensity, you can blow out stuff really easily. So it's often not a bad idea to keep the intensity relatively low. I don't know if you just saw that, but if I go to intensity of 3.2, then, or higher even, like the higher I bring up the intensity, things get more blown out. So I try to keep the intensity relatively low, knowing that I can instead turn up my exposure. So look, I'm doing the power of thing too again. I mean, it's not required at all, and the amount that it speeds up your render is negligible, but it is, like I said, an old school trick, an old school hack. So, you know, I'm all about the old school hacks and tricks. So there you go. Got that nice light coming in from the sun there, and we're getting some nice bloom over here. I don't know if you can see it, but some nice bounce light going on. It's cool. Here, I'll zoom in. See, it's noisy, but you can definitely see that the light is bouncing onto the wall. Cool. And we know how to fix noise, right? Turn up your sampling. So there it is right there. There's your samples, right? So let's crank up our samples to 4 here, and that will begin to get rid of this noise. And again, you can turn up the exposure to be whatever you think you need it to be, meaning that if you want things to be much brighter in general, of course you can turn up your exposure. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So if I were to go to 6.4, you're going to see something that really starts to get super blown out. And you might even see more bounce light as well. Yep. And now you're seeing this is just, things are definitely blown out at this point. In fact, it's so blown out that it's affecting the gobo or affecting the light mask, or these Venetian blinds are kind of even running into one another. So this is an example of too much, right? So too much exposure. And like I said, I haven't really found a magical formula to figure out how to balance your exposure against your intensity. Obviously, if you go too high in your intensity or too high in your exposure, things begin to get really blown out. And we already have fill light for this, I repeat. So we don't want the sunlight to bounce around too much, because a lot of the fill light should be coming in from the sky dome. All right, last thing I want to say about let's bump the exposure up to 5. Again, it doesn't have to be a power of 2. I'm just saying that's not a bad starting place. So please understand that the number can be whatever you want it to be. It doesn't matter. So, okay. Last thing about your sun. We have the correct Kelvin color temperature. We have, I think, the correct exposure roughly against the intensity. Angle is actually how blurry these shadows are. So if you want a little bit of shadow blurriness, which if you look carefully, you can see these are pretty sharp shadows. So if you'd like to blur out your shadows a little bit, that's going to be your angle. So let's look at the difference. If I type in 1, I'll save this. This is why render region is nice. Save the image, use render region. Awesome. Pretty cool. See, now we have blurry shadows, and you can compare before and after. So maybe you might say, well, that's no, that's too much. And I agree. I think it's too much anyway. So I would take the angle down to something a little bit more reasonable. And again, there's your power of 2.32. And yes, take it or leave it. Like, honestly, it's an old school hack. It doesn't really decrease your render time that much. I like that. But you could even go a little lower. Let's go again to 0.16. And don't feel like you're married to the power of 2 thing. I know I'm rambling on about it. But it's just something over the years. If I'm not sure, sure. I think that's a good amount of blurriness for the shadow. So key light done. If my key light is done and my skylight is done, let's turn them both on. Now let's, again, light one thing at a time. Now both are on. So let's now see how our key light looks against our fill light. One more render region. Feels like my fill light is maybe still a little too bright. And obviously there's a huge amount of noise, which is the next thing I want to talk about. So we want to try to get our color as well as the lighting intensity roughly correct between our key light, which is our sun in this case, and our fill light, which is of course our sky dome. Just try to get something close and try not to pay too much attention to the noise. I know it's annoying. Sorry. But try to get something roughly approximate. We want to try to avoid really black shadows. So that's where our problem area is, these sort of super black shadows down here. And if there are no questions, I want to talk about a new type of light, which we haven't talked about before. And also, well, I'll paste a link into Discord for an Arnold document. But before I move on, I really need to know if you guys have questions or not. Can I move on? Ryan, I know you're saying good so far, but can somebody speak up or say something? Make sure I'm not going too fast. I haven't lost anybody at all. Are you guys with me? Here, I'm going to take this. This is what I'd like you guys to look at for homework. So under announcements, I'm going to paste this in. This is similar to, or pretty close to, what I'm going over right now. So if you need a document to follow along with me or to refer back to, it's here. Anyway, go for it. Okay, good. Good so far. Cool. Just want to make sure. All right, so now I have to introduce you to a new type of light. And I've been putting this off for a long time, but we have a very powerful light in Maya. I'll save this. Always save. We have a very powerful light in Maya called an area light. In fact, I'm going to save this and reopen it because I think this is worth super fast doing a quick new scene. And I know you're, no, don't do that. Please don't do that. But it'll be fast, I promise. Super fast. Something super fast. Try to make it as fast as I humanly can. When we're dealing with nice soft shadows, and we want really nice soft shadows, and that's what we're after, and we're dealing with, say, interior lighting, which is what we're dealing with, And let's pretend we're in 405. We're in a classroom right now. Let's pretend we're somewhere that we have panel lights or fluorescent lights. Now, in your rendering shelf, you have an area light. It exists here. It's, I think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. It's the fifth one here. So some of you guys might have already done this and tried to play around with this area light. Stop it. Stop it. I hope you didn't do that. I hope you didn't do that because I never told you to do that. Some of you guys like to jump the gun. In the Arnold shelf, there's also an area light, and it's right here. There it is. And this is better because why? Because I just told you that the lights on the Arnold shelf are all physically accurate. So they're always going to be better because they're built to be physically accurate all the time. So these are just simply better. Anyway, hit T for target like you did before, and hopefully you can aim it with the target. But here's one of those rare instances in which they kind of broke the targeting on the area light. But you know what? That's okay. Because even though my target is broken, I don't know why, but it appears to be broken, this kind of gives me an opportunity to teach you another way to aim a light. I mean, obviously there's rotation, and you should be able to hit T for target, but since that doesn't work, the other way to aim a light is to go to Panel, Look Through Selected, and now I'm actually looking through my light as if it was a camera, which is kind of a cool trick. Anyway, that's another way to aim your light. It works really well with a spotlight, by the way. Hit the 7 button. Note that the 7 button doesn't work as well with these physically accurate lights. In fact, we don't see anything. But what have we already talked about in terms of lighting? We've talked about the fact that now everything is quadratic decay by default, so we kind of have to just crank up our intensity. And note that I'm starting to see it in the viewport. And don't be shy about turning this intensity up to whatever you want, and then magically the 7 button now works, because again, quadratic decay dictates that we have to really crank this intensity up way higher than maybe you might think. So don't be shy about doing that. Why do I like area lights? Because area lights are really nice for creating super soft shadows. And so the larger the area light that you scale, this is the only light, by the way, that has this feature. So no other light does this. But whether you're using the area light here in the Arnold shelf or the old area light, which again, don't use that when you have this one. Why not use the better one? Use the better one, of course. Both area lights or any area light will change according to scale. So as you scale up the area light, you should see that your render will actually get brighter, meaning that the intensity of your area light actually does change according to scale. If you scale your area light to be very, very small, like super small, the smaller I make the area light, the darker the render actually becomes. I swear it's true. I swear it's true. Unless that's a feature of the old area light. Which now I love it when I say something and then immediately contradict myself. Okay, I guess maybe in this case. Really? Well, the old area light worked that way just fine. Man, go back here, undo. Turn the light inside out. That's never good. Okay, well, it's supposed to change intensity according to scale, at least the old one. So maybe that's a difference between the new and old area light. I don't know, but here is something that I know absolutely is true. The size of the area light will also change the shadow. Notably, the smaller the area light, you should get a sharper shadow here. So what I'm trying to say is if you make a giant area light, like a really huge area light, make a big one, look how it blurs out the shadow down here. I guess that's what I'm really getting at. So when you scale your area light, not only does it blur your shadow, but it's supposed to also change the intensity as well. So just be aware the size of your area light really makes a big difference, especially with how blurry the shadow is. Oh, and by the way, we have sampling issues, right? So we have sampling in your area light. Turn up the sampling to something like 4, and then you're going to get a nice soft shadow. So that's how we can use our area light to create really nice soft shadows by scaling it up. And then if you're trying to light say, something with a skylight or with a panel light, then an area light might work really, really well for you. Okay. And basically, they're super awesome lights, but you have to make sure that when you use an area light that you're mimicking a real world light. So if you put an area light in your scene, it better be for a reason. Don't just stick one in at an angle like this. This is extremely fake and CG. You want your area light to either reflect a panel light in your room, like you would in maybe one in the school, like in Franklin Terrace or something, for example. Or, as I'm about to show you, you can also put your area lights in your windows. And that will mimic the light coming through the window to a degree. Have I lost everybody at this point? It's 2 already. God damn it. Okay, thank you. Appreciate the reminder. I'm going to have to push this for about 5 more minutes. Sorry. I'll try to wrap it up, though. I appreciate the reminder. Okay, so in this case, I've already put some area lights in the windows, but this is where I'm probably going to start to lose people, so hang on tight. In older versions of Maya, the area lights functioned as a way to push more light into the room through the windows. So what am I talking about? Well, you would actually put an area light where the window is, and then you would turn it into a portal light. That would push more light into the room. Well, they've kind of like switched things up on me, sadly. So I always like to make things confusing. So even though your area lights and portal lights were the same thing in older versions of Maya, well, now they're 2 separate lights, which of course makes things nice and confusing. So start by making a portal light that's here between the sky dome and the sun and sky system. This is a portal light. It looks like an area light, by the way. So if I turn it on, you're going to see it looks just like an area light. You point it in through the window. So I have 2 of them. And I've moved and scaled and rotated both of them like so. So they're just, it's like light coming through the window. And this is going to be what you can use. And I know I'm running a little late on this demo, but this is going to be what you can use to clean up some of this noise and push the light farther into the render. Or excuse me, farther into the room, rather, I'm sorry. So then with your portal lights on, or your portal lights in place, we should start to get less noise and more light pushed into the room. Wow. Why is this acting so slow right now? Oh my God. All right. Oh, it's because it crashed. That's why. That's nice. No, it's just hating life right now. Come on. Sorry, I'm now experiencing unbelievable lag. This usually occurs because of Twitch, and I've just got to try to only use chat without the tab actually being open, because that's usually what kills this for me every time. Like my mouse it won't even move. It's great. Come on. Stop it. Come back to me, Maya. What are you doing? It's not a good time. I didn't even click the render button, as far as I know. What the heck? Stop freaking out. Oh, it might be because the interactive renderer is on. Sorry about that. Let's try that one more time. Seriously? Yeah, pick your rendering window. Don't have both of them on. Let's go back to the old school one. Well, I am getting it to render. I can see there's a progress bar down there. 12% done, 18% done. If you didn't know about the progress bar, now you know. But I'm not sure why I'm not seeing it on the screen. So I'll just let this finish rendering. When it finishes rendering, I can always click on this icon here, the slate with the eyeball, and that should show me the results. But what's different is I now have what are called light portals. And I don't want to confuse you because they're related to area lights. In older versions of Maya, they were literally area lights with a checkbox where you switch them to portal lights. Now, in this new version of Maya with Arnold, we have our area lights that are actually separate from our portal lights. Makes things kind of confusing in my mind. But let me try to explain it this way. Your portal lights are there to help the light sampling, and it helps push the light into the room from the outside window. So the light coming in from the sky, which is your fill light, the light coming in from the sun, which is your directional light, by putting in portal lights, they should theoretically help clean up your noise. Let's see what it looks like. Come on, show me. Show me the window. Frustrating. Panel size cannot accommodate all requested heads-up display elements. I'm about to just switch to the interactive renderer. I swear we just had the render window on the screen and it said it finished a render. Oh, very frustrating. Gotta love it when the render window is broken. It's wonderful. Good stuff, good stuff. I'm like, no, I'm going to force this issue. Screw that. Go to the interactive renderer. Here we go. Just use the 2020 render window. Why not? Make it happen. Make it work. So here it is. I know I'm over time, so I guess I kind of have to stop here because I am over time. I want to stop this lighting demo. But as you can see here, I'm starting to really get some nice results. I don't know if you agree with me or not. You're probably like, no, the noise looks terrible. And yeah, that is correct. But we can easily fix your noise issues by, like I keep saying, turning up the sampling. So let's stop this interactive render. Let's draw a render region. And yes, that is possible here. That's this blue box. Who said that was a gray moment? Like you guys haven't struggled with technical issues. Please. Please. Anyway, we draw a render region, just like in the old school window. And then we just slowly turn up our sampling, specifically in the sun and sky. And if, like, I wouldn't go too much over 4 on each one. So check your sampling. Okay, I've got 4 on the sky, and I've got 4 on the sun. Now that's a little depressing. Let's turn up the sampling here to 4 and 4 in our overall Arnold render settings. Use your render region here, click the play button, and now this should start to clean up our noise nicely. So I repeat, turn up the sampling on your lights first. Do it slowly, right? And then start to turn up your sampling in your Arnold settings. But again, slowly. Don't just jump to 6 or 8 or 10, because again, it is exponential, right? So then turn up your numbers like from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, but you know, one at a time, basically. And now we're going to get a really, really nice result for the end of my demo. Once my sampling is turned up, all this noise will go away. But I hope you guys agree with me that I'm starting to get a really, really nice lighting setup. and I only have technically two light sources, the sun and sky. And I know you're going to argue with me, but what about the portal lights? Yeah. The portal lights are there to make the sun and sky look better through the window. That's the function that they serve specifically. And they should specifically help by pushing the light further into the room. I hope this all makes sense to you guys. I hope that you agree with me that this lighting looks a lot better than what I started with. And again, if there are any questions, please say something. For the middle of the day, you do not, it's okay for this to be blown out. That makes sense, obviously. But for the middle of the day, you should try to get away from pure black shadows. And if you see that you have a lot of pure black shadows in the middle of the day, you could probably tweak your sky dome settings a little bit more. And if you look at the document that I sent to you via Discord, they even recommend potentially putting in regular area lights in your window. Sorry, I have to mention this, but it is a thing, right? So if you still are getting pure black shadows, no matter what you do, we have another option, which is to actually literally put area lights here, as you see, putting area lights outside the windows, shooting area lights in. Be careful because it's really easy to overpower your lighting. But in this way, we can pretty much get rid of all those pure black shadows. Anyway, I guess I got to stop because I'm way over. But hey, I think you'll agree with me. This looks a hell of a lot better than it did when we started. So questions, guys. I gotta ask one last time. I meant going over time is a great moment. Yeah. I know. I'm gonna stop on that note. On that note, thanks.